in on a story in John chapter 9. And if you have your Bible this morning, I would encourage you to look at this as I read it. John chapter 9, starting at verse 1. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. "Rabbi," his disciples asked him, "why was this man born blind? Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins?" "It was not because of his sins or his parents' sins," Jesus answered. "This happened so the power of God could be seen in him. We must quickly carry out the task assigned to us by the one who sent us. The night is coming, and then no one can work. But while I'm here in the world, I am the light of the world." Then he spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, and spread the mud over the blind man's eyes. He told him, "Go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam." Siloam means sent. So the man went and he washed and came back seeing. His neighbors and others who knew him as a blind beggar asked each other, "Isn't this the man who used to sit and beg?" Some said he was, and others said, "No, he just looks like him." Now this story goes on. There's some great things in the rest of this chapter, but we just want to zero in on the first part of this story this morning because there's some amazing things going on here that I'm sure at first glance you probably didn't catch. And so that's why we're going to break it down this morning and talk about it. And there's some things that you and I can learn with regard to trust and obedience in this story. But even before we get there, we need to get some background because it's so rich. So if you would permit me to, I want to back up in our story so you know what has just happened because it really is the setup for this miracle. In chapter 8, Jesus is having conversation with some of his detractors, some of the religious leaders of his day. These guys do not like him. They're trying to do everything they can to discredit him. They're always looking for ways to trip him up. And this is going on again in chapter 8. They're trying to catch Jesus in some way that they can make him look less than in front of the rest of the people. And so in the process of this, they tell Jesus, after he says a few things, "You're possessed. You're demon possessed, man. That's what your problem is." And Jesus responds in verse 51 of chapter 8. He says, "I tell you the truth. Anyone who obeys my teaching will never die." He says, "I'm not possessed, but let me tell you something. Anyone who obeys my teaching, they're never going to die." Jesus has such an amazing way, and I guess you would expect that of the Son of God, but he has such an amazing way of just getting to the heart of the issue. They accuse him of being possessed. "I'm not possessed, but let me tell you something. If you want to live forever, you need to obey my words, obey my teaching." Well, these religious guys are really upset at this point, and they say this, "Now we know you're possessed by a demon. Even Abraham and the prophets died, but you say, 'Anyone who obeys my teaching will never die.' Are you greater than our father Abraham? He died, and so did the prophets. Who do you think you are?" Listen to Jesus' answer. This is great. Jesus answered, "If I want glory for myself, it doesn't count. But it is my Father who will glorify me. You say he is our God, but you don't even know him. I know him. If I said otherwise, I would be a liar as you are. But I do know him and obey him. Your father Abraham, he rejoiced as he looked forward to my coming. He saw it and was glad." Jesus says so much there, but I want you to notice how he links knowing God with obedience to him. He says, "You say that God is your God? You don't even know him. I know him." And you know how Jesus describes that he knows him? "I know him and obey him." And then he makes this statement about Abraham. Abraham looked forward to see me coming? He was glad of it? The people said, "You aren't even 50 years old. How can you say you've seen Abraham?" Jesus answered, "I'll tell you the truth. Before Abraham was even born, I am." Now, if you were here last week, you know how significant that statement is. Jesus, you're not even 50, and you're trying to tell us that you've seen Abraham, Abraham's seen you? Are you nuts? Jesus said, let me tell you something. Before Abraham was even born, before he was even on the earth, I am. And we look at that and we go, what is he saying? Because it doesn't make any sense unless you know what took place in the Old Testament. Remember last week we said that in order to really begin to learn to trust God, you have to know his name. His name in the Old Testament is the Hebrew word Yahweh. It's translated, I am. It's what God told Moses at the burning bush. God was telling Moses, I want you to go and tell Pharaoh, let my people go. And Moses was like, you got the wrong guy. I'm not the one. And God just continues. And finally, Moses is in his argument saying, well, look, if I go, and they say, well, who is this God? What's his name? Who do I tell him sent me? And God said, you tell him, I am has sent you. And we said, what on earth is this I am? This name, Yahweh, which comes up over 6,000 times in the Old Testament. What is this all about? What is this I am? And we said that I am simply means God absolutely is. He is self-existent. He is the eternal one. Nothing made him. Nothing can destroy him. He is self-sufficient. He is self-contained. He is all-powerful. And that's wrapped up in this name, Yahweh, I am. And so Jesus, being pushed to the point, says to these guys, let me tell you something. Before Abraham was, I am. Jesus was linking himself to God. You say, did those guys know it? Yeah, if you read the next verse, it said they picked up stones and they wanted to kill him because they knew exactly what he was saying. They knew exactly what he was referring to. He was referring to the I am of the Old Testament. Well, that's what leads up to our story. Jesus has just made this bold statement. These guys want to kill him. It said he was able to slide out without them being able to figure it out. Probably what happened is the crowd just was like, whoa, did you just hear that? And people were kind of going crazy. And these guys are picking up rocks and Jesus just kind of slides out. And he and his disciples leave the temple and they're walking down the street and they see this blind guy begging. And the disciples, for whatever reason, they just look over and they go, hey, Jesus, got a question. Why do you think this guy is blind? Was it his sin or the sin of his parents? See, because back in that day, if someone had some kind of a serious suffering issue, they believed it was because somebody close to them, like a parent or a relative, had been in some great sin and God was judging those people by making this person have this particular issue. Or they believed that you could actually sin in the womb before you were even born. You could do some kind of sin. I don't know what that would look like. I don't know if it, because you kicked your mom too hard or something. I don't know. But they literally believed that you could commit sin inside the womb. And so this question seems odd to us, but it was very much in line with the way the people thought back then. And so the disciples are, this is their rabbi. This is their teacher. And so here's a living illustration. Hey, I wonder what's going on here. Hey, Jesus, who sinned here? This guy or his parents? Jesus said, neither one of them. This guy is the way he is so that the power of God can be revealed in him. Man, that's a loaded statement. We'll get to that in just a minute. But then he says, man, it's going to get dark real soon. And while it's still day, we need to go about doing what we were sent to do. And while I'm in the world, I'm the light of the world. And we look at that and we go, huh? Is this just some kind of random statement out of the blue? No, it's not. And we'll talk about that in a minute too. But Jesus makes this statement. And then he spits in the dirt. And then he starts making some mud. And if I'm a disciple, I'm looking at this going, think he's lost it. What's going on? This is kind of weird. And then he takes the mud and he puts it on the eyes of the blind man. Remember what he just got done saying. Before Abraham was, I am. How did the great I am create man? He formed him out of the dust of the ground. Now the great I am is taking some of that material that he formed man with, and he's rubbing it on his eyes. And then he tells this guy, I want you to go to the pool of Siloam. I want you to wash it off. He does. He sees for the first time in his life. Can you imagine that? Comes back and people are trying to figure out, is this really the guy? Is this the same guy? Can't be the same guy. No, I think it is the same guy. And the story goes on. But what an amazing, miraculous story that has so much in it. But what I'd like us to see this morning, that there is some things about trust and obedience in this story that are really rich for you and me. There are 4 ways that we can see that trust obeys in this story. And along with that, there are 4 hindrances to trust that we can see in here today. And if you'll listen real close, I'll do my best to help you fill in those blanks, because I know for some of you, like me, if I have a blank on a piece of paper and it doesn't get filled in, it'll drive me crazy. So I'm going to try to do my best since we don't have the screens up here. But please know that I am available after service if you just have to have that blank filled in and I didn't get it for you, okay? So here we go. Here's number 1. Trust obeys even without proof of a desired outcome. Trust obeys even without proof of a desired outcome. Jesus sees this blind man. Notice the text wants to make sure that we know that he's been blind since the day he was born. This guy has never seen anything before. Jesus spits into the dirt, makes this mud, puts it on his eyes, tells him to go wash. I also want you to notice he never tells him why he should go wash. He never says, look, go wash this off, and when it's all done, you're going to be able to see again. He never tells him that. It's never there in the story. He just says, go wash. We don't have any indication from the story that Jesus says, hey, go wash that off. And as he's going, one of the disciples say, hey, just do what he says because you'll be healed. We've seen this 12 times. Go ahead. We don't have that. All we have is Jesus puts this mud on the guy's eyes. He says, go wash. There's no indication in this passage that he's going to be healed. He could have gone, washed the mud off, still couldn't see. There was nothing for this guy to hang his hat on. You say, well, wait a minute. Maybe he had heard about Jesus. Maybe he had heard about the great miracles Jesus did. And maybe when Jesus showed up and he did this, he had some of that to go on. Maybe, but we're not told that. In fact, if you go further on in the story, when he continues to be questioned after he's healed, it seems like he doesn't even know who Jesus is. He calls him the man named Jesus. Like he just met him for the very first time. So there's no indication that he's got any kind of background with Jesus at all. This guy just comes, put this mud on his eyes, tells him to go and wash, and he has no proof that it's going to turn out the way that it should turn out. See, that's obeying, even though you don't have proof that the outcome is going to be like you want it to be. See, I don't know about you, but I kind of always like to know step by step where I'm going and what's going to happen. I don't like surprises. Are you like that? I'd like to know what's out ahead of me. I like to plan things. If I'm going to fix something, I like to study what it is I'm going to fix and kind of know where I'm going. It drives me nuts when I think a project's going to take an hour and 2 hours into it. It's like, God, I can't believe this. I thought I had this all figured out. I want to know where it's going. I want to know what the outcome's going to be. I don't like the surprises. But when it comes to obeying and trusting, and that's what, obedience is this active faith. Okay, I'm going to believe, and to do that, I have to step out in obedience. And many times when we step out in obedience, we have to do it without proof that the outcome is going to be what we hope that it'll be. See, if I had it my way, and I got a hunch that maybe some of you are like this too, I'd like to plan out my life and have all these contingencies all worked out, where it's going to go, how everything's going to happen, where I'm going to spend my time, who I'm going to meet, how things are going to go, even plan my own quiet death in my sleep so that I have no pain and feel. And are you with me? You ever do that? God, if, by your grace, if you'd let me slip off in my sleep, that would be great. See, I know the outcomes that I want. But I also understand as I study Scripture more and more that trust obeys even when the outcome is unknown. Even when there's no proof it's going to turn out the way that I want it to. So what's a hindrance to this trust? Well, trust is hindered when I insist that the outcome of trust opportunities fit my desired outcome. You say, what is that all about, Rand? That's when I say, look, okay, God, I'm going to trust you in this, but could you let me know it's going to turn out good? I really want to obey you and trust you in this, God, but could you just let me know it's going to turn out okay? Because that would make it a whole lot easier to trust you in this situation. Let me give you an Old Testament example. Some of you may remember this from your Sunday school days. One of my favorite stories. Back in Daniel chapter 3. In fact, if you're reading through our Bible reading plan, we were in Daniel this week, in Daniel chapter 3, a matter of fact. In Daniel chapter 3, we meet up with three guys again. We met them at the beginning of the chapter, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And there's a king named Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar builds this 90-foot tall golden statue. And he makes a decree. He says that everybody in the kingdom, when there's the sound of the music, they have to bow down and they have to worship this golden image. And if you don't worship the golden image, we have a furnace of fire, and you'll be thrown in the furnace and you'll be burned up. Pretty cut and dry. The problem is, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they served the one true God. And they knew that they couldn't bow down to anything else, let alone a golden statue. There were some guys that worked with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that didn't like them because they were these good boys. And they were always trying to get them. And so when the king came out with this decree, sure enough, the music played, everybody drops, except for these three guys. And they're just standing there. Not making a big deal about it. They're not saying, oh, you bunch of heathens bowing down. What are you? They're just standing there, waiting for everybody to get done, bowing down to the statue. Then they pop up and everybody goes back to work. But the guys that were out to get Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, as they're down there bowing, they're looking up going, we got them. We got them. And they run to the king and they said, King, didn't you make a decree that when the music sounds, everybody's supposed to drop and worship the image that you created? And he said, that's absolutely right. Well, King, we got to tell you, there's these three guys. I think you know them, King. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Yeah, they're great guys. They're really smart. They're some of my best guys. Well, let me tell you something, King. They didn't bow down when the music played. And so the king's mad, and he calls them in. And he said, guys, is it true that you didn't bow down? Let me tell you something. I'm going to give you another chance. Next time the music plays, if you will drop down and worship in front of the golden idol, everything will be fine. I'm going to give you one more chance to save your lives, literally. I want you to listen to what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said. Verse 17 of Daniel 3. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. Now listen to this. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the golden statue you have set up. Do you understand what's going on there? No guarantee. They say, look, we know our God's able to save us. We know that if you decide that's what you want to do, that God can save us, but we want you to know something too, King. We don't know if he is, and even if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow down to your statue. What are they saying? We are going to obey even though we have no proof that it's going to turn out desirable for us. That's what they're saying. We choose to trust our God by obeying him, even though we don't know how it's all going to turn out. That's exactly what they're saying here. Now, it turned out good, but they didn't know it was going to turn out that way. And see, folks, here we are. We're in a situation so many times where we go through situations where, okay, I know what's right, especially if you've been a follower of Christ for a while. You know the right thing to do is trust God in this situation, but you also know that there's some really unknown ways this could turn out. God, could you just show me that it would turn out okay, and then I'm sure I'll be able to trust you. And God, most of the time, I would say 99.9% of the time, isn't going to give you that answer. He's just going to say, trust me. Trust me. Trust obeys, despite the fact that there's no proof that's going to turn out desirable. Here's number 2. Trust obeys even when it's not convenient. Trust obeys even when it's not convenient. Jesus tells this guy, go wash yourself in the pool of Siloam. Now, let me give you some, you might not get this just reading the story, but remember what we just came through in chapter 8. They were in the temple. Most people in that day that had a situation, blind, crippled, they begged. That's how they got by. They begged alms. And whatever they got, that's how they sustained themselves. And they did it within the realms of the temple because so many people were going in and out of the temple. They would make sure that they would set themselves up near the temple so these people that were going in to worship, coming out to worship, people that were trying to look good before God would maybe drop some coins into their basket, and that would help them to survive another day. So this blind man is somewhere in the area of the temple. You say, why is that a big deal? Because notice, he doesn't just say go wash. He tells them the specific place to go wash. I want you to go wash at the pool of Siloam. That pool is, depending on where this guy is somewhere between 1/2 mile to 3/4 of a mile away from the temple area. And you go, well, that's not that far. It is if you're blind. If you're blind, you're dependent. Unless it's a place that you go on a regular basis and you know how many steps it is because you've traveled that over and over again. If it's some place that you don't typically go, you are dependent on other people to help you get there. And if there's nobody to help you get there, you're stumbling and bumbling through in a city that's bustling to try to get to this place about 1/2 mile away. Was it tough? You got to know. In the very least, it's inconvenient. See, I'm looking at this going, wow, this is kind of hard. Jesus tells this guy, go wash in this pool. I mean, couldn't there possibly have been a body of water closer by that would be a little bit more convenient? Couldn't he maybe have found a camel that had a canteen strapped around it that he could have grabbed for him and given it to him? Why did he make him do this inconvenient thing? And the bottom line is that obedient trust isn't always convenient. And this guy had to make a decision. I got this mud all over my eyes, and this guy's telling me to go to this pool. It's 1/2 mile away. Am I going to do this? Would you put this down on hindering? Trust is hindered when I desire to only experience convenient trust opportunities. When I desire to only experience convenient trust opportunities, God, just give me the ones that are easy. I want to grow in my trust of you, God. I really do want to act on this faith that I have. But God, would you just give me some easy ones, some convenient ones? Don't call me to have to go somewhere beyond Molokai to fulfill whatever it is that you're telling me. That would be super inconvenient, God. God, just give me some trust experiences that are convenient ones, not inconvenient. In Luke chapter 5, Jesus shows up to preach near the Sea of Galilee. And it says that when he showed up, there was some guys that had just finished fishing all night, and they were off to the side, and they were cleaning their nets. And the crowd started to get really big, and so Jesus asked, hey, can I jump in one of your boats and just push offshore so that I can teach? And they said, yeah, sure, go ahead. So he jumps in the boat, and he teaches. And when he's done teaching, one of the fishermen is Simon Peter, one of his disciples. And he says to him, he says, Peter, I want you to go back out into the water and I want you to drop your net. And I want you to fish again. And listen to what Peter says. Master, we worked hard all night and we didn't catch a thing. But if you say so, I'll let the nets down again. Do you hear what's going on with Peter? Peter's in this reluctant situation of obedient trust. Jesus said, Peter, I want you to go back out. Jesus, I just finished cleaning my nets. You saw me cleaning my nets. We were out all night. We caught nothing. And it's almost like as he's saying it, he's going, oh, but I really need to trust him. This is so inconvenient. If you know the story, he gets in and he goes out with the rest of the guys and they catch so many fish they can't hardly get him in. But here's the deal. It's not always convenient to obey. It's not always convenient to trust. And this blind man had to make a decision. Am I going to obey? Am I going to trust this guy even though it's incredibly inconvenient? Folks, I don't know about you, but I see me written all over this stuff. I want to know how it's going to turn out. I want things to be convenient. Yeah, I'll trust God, but can we kind of make it easy? Can we make this a little bit more convenient? Here's number 3. Trust obeys even when it doesn't make sense. Jesus spits on the ground, makes this mud, spreads it over the guy's eyes, tells him to go to this pool. Now, let me give you some background on Jesus' ministry to this point. Jesus has already healed a blind guy by just touching him. In fact, in Luke chapter 7, Jesus heals a guy that he's not even around. This centurion has a servant who's sick in another town, and Jesus heals him just by saying the word. He's not even in the same town as the guy's in. Jesus heals with a touch. He heals with a word. I mean, you would expect that from the Son of God. So why on earth does he make this mud? I mean, come on, it's kind of gross if you think he's spitting in the ground and making this. Really? And he puts it on his eyes. Does that make any sense to you? I mean, I look at this and I go, I don't know, but this doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. Could Jesus heal with a touch? Yeah, he did it. Could he heal with just the word? Yeah, he did it. Hey, and how about making this poor guy walk a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile? None of this seems to kind of fit. It doesn't really make sense. So can you explain that to me, Rand? Actually, I can't. Because the bottom line is, sometimes obedient trust doesn't make a whole lot of sense. from our perspective. And that's the hindrance. Trust is hindered when I assume that trust opportunities will always make sense. Well, this can't be an opportunity to trust God. It doesn't make any sense. Well, I would tell you to go back and look at stories in Scripture where there's a lot of situations that don't make a lot of sense. We used Abraham last week as an example of a situation where God says, hey, I want you to take Isaac, your son, your only son, the son that you love, and I want you to sacrifice him on an altar. And we look at that, and if we don't know the background and we don't know what's going on, we look at that and go, man, this does not make sense. And when trust obeys, it obeys whether it makes a whole lot of sense or not. Let me remind you of another story. This is another one of my favorite Sunday school stories. Joshua chapter 6 in the Old Testament. See, God has brought Israel out of Egypt using Moses as the deliverer, and Moses ran into some problems with trusting God, by the way. And God said, Moses, because you didn't trust me, I'm not going to let you go into the land. You can see it from a mountain, but you're not going to be able to go in. And Moses wasn't able to go into the land that he was hoping and trusting at first to get into and to take these people into. He didn't get to go into it because he failed in his trust of God. Well, God raised up this guy, Joshua, and Joshua was a great man of faith. We see that earlier on in the story of coming out of Egypt. And Joshua, this leader, gets them from outside the land into the land. And Joshua is the one that's going to lead them into battle against some of these cities. And the very first place that they have to conquer is a place called Jericho. Now, Jericho was an incredible city because of its wall. Any city that was worth its salt back in those days had a wall around it. That's the way they protected themselves. Now, I used to think of a wall around a city like a stone wall that we would maybe see around here. You got to get that out of your mind. These things were massive. In fact, you could ride chariots 2 to 3 abreast on some of these walls in these ancient cities. Jericho was like this. These massive, thick, tall walls that were built to keep people out. Well, this is the first city that Israelites have to conquer. Remember, these aren't even the original slaves that came out of Egypt. These are the children of the slaves. The generation that came out of Egypt had to pass away in the wilderness because they didn't trust God either. So this is their kids. They're kind of soft. They didn't have to go through slavery. And now here they are. They're supposed to be warriors. And so Joshua is meeting with God and trying to get a battle plan. And God says, Joshua, this is what I want you to do. I want you to get all your warriors together. And I want you to go out tomorrow. And I want you to march to Jericho. And I want you to take all your warriors and march around the city one time. And then go back to camp. And then Joshua, on the second day, I want you to do it again. I want you to get all your warriors together, have them get all their gear on, get all their stuff on. And I want you to take them out, then they're going to march down to Jericho, and then they're going to march all the way around the city once again. And Joshua, I want you to do that on the third day, the fourth day, the fifth day, the sixth day. Then I want you to go out on the seventh day. And this time, I don't want you to go around once. I want you to march around the city 7 times. And on the 7th time, you are going to have the guys with the trumpets blow the trumpets, and you're going to have everybody yell and scream, and then I'm going to do a great, great work. And I'm reading that, and I'm going, well, that just don't make sense. That don't make sense to me. I mean, can you imagine? First day. You're on the wall, you're the Jericho warrior, and you're on this massive wall that you're really proud of because, man, nobody can break through this. We're amazing. And even if they did, we got them. And so you're looking out, and all of a sudden you see, here they come, boys. I can see those Israelites. Here they come. And they come. Get ready. Get your bows ready. Get your spears ready. They're all ready. And here they come. They're just marching. And they watch them. Okay, I don't know what they're doing, but you better be ready because I think they're circling. When they get all the way around, they're going to attack. Get ready, get ready. And they march all the way around. They're ready. They're ready to go. And the guys march around, and they go right back out again. What are they doing? I don't know. Crazy. Second day comes around. Okay, boys, here they come again. Let's not be fooled. This time I know they're going to get us this time. Get ready, get ready. And here they come. They march all the way around. All right, be ready. And out again. By the fourth day, you're sitting on the wall going, here comes those idiots again. Got any more of that beef jerky, by the way? I mean, you're thinking, these guys are nuts. What's going on? Seventh day comes around. Here they come again, boys. They go around once. This time they don't go out. Hey, whoa. They're going around again. Maybe they lost count. Third time they go around again. Fourth, fifth, sixth. They're going, what are these crazy guys doing? Seventh time around. All of a sudden the trumpets blast. The warriors scream. These guys are standing on the wall going, whoa, what is going on? It begins to shake and quake. And the Bible says the wall fell, and great was its fall. And the warriors just ran in and took the city. Say, great story. But it sure didn't make any sense at the beginning, did it? It didn't make any sense. Look, we're talking about a God who could create. We're talking about the God who made the stones that were in the wall. All he had to do is go, and it was done. What on earth did these guys have to do this for? He wanted them to learn to trust and obey and watch what would happen when they did. Didn't make any sense at the beginning. This doesn't make sense. This guy, mud on my eyes, walking a half mile. This doesn't make any sense. Listen, obedient trust doesn't always make sense. And if you're going to wait until it makes sense, guess what? You're never going to learn trust. You're never going to learn trust. Because let me tell you something. God will ask you to do some things sometimes that don't make sense. And I'm telling you from experience. Rand, I want you to go to Molokai, and I want you to pastor a church there. God, I'm not from Molokai. I'm from Miami. God, I'd really like to stay here. Besides, the Dolphins are having a great year, and I really don't want to leave in the middle of the season. No, this is where I want you to go. God, it doesn't make any sense. There's got to be somebody from Molokai that would be better suited than me to go and pastor a church. Besides, I have 3 kids now and a wife that really likes to stay close to her family. This just doesn't make any sense, God. See, let me tell you something. Obedient trust doesn't always make sense. And you're going to come to a point where you have to decide, am I just going to trust? Because of what I know, remember last week, because of my relationship, because of my experiences to this point. Here's number 4. Trust obeys even when God's plan is not clearly seen. Jesus walks with his disciples. They see this blind man, Rabbi. Why is this man born blind? Was it his sin or was it the sin of his parents? Jesus says it wasn't either one of them. This happened so the power of God could be seen in him. You see what's going on here? Now I'm going to tell you something right now. Some of you aren't going to like this. This man was blind, and God was going to use his blindness to demonstrate his power. You say, why might I not like that? Because God very well could take you through a trust experience so he can demonstrate power through your life. That's not comfortable. Certainly isn't convenient. And it's not anything you and I would plan ourselves. What is God's plan? I want you to stop and think about it for a minute. Jesus had just gotten done proclaiming to these enemies of his, I am. He made this strong statement about his deity, his godness. Shortly after that, perhaps just minutes after that, walking out the temple, here's this scene with this blind guy. Disciples, why is this guy like this? Did he sin? Did his parents sin? No. Look, you don't understand. This guy is this way because the power of God is going to be revealed in this guy. What's he saying? I'm going to demonstrate that what I just said I am is true by restoring this guy's sight. Now, again, I wish we had time to go through the rest of the story, but the guy is questioned over and over again, and finally he's taken in front of the religious leaders, and they go, look, how did you get your sight? And he tells them the story. And then they ask him again later on, okay, tell us how you got your sight. He goes, look, I already told you. And they say, okay, well then just say that this Jesus is a sinner. And he said, no, look, you guys should be able to figure this out. No sinner could do this kind of work that he did. And besides all that, no one has ever restored anybody's sight in the history of the world. What was he saying? He's saying, look, you guys figure it out. And the point that Jesus was making when he made this statement about, hey, the power of God, this has happened so the power of God can be revealed in him. I'm going to demonstrate to you guys right now that when I said I am, I am. So, where does that leave the blind guy? Well, he's got to make a decision. Am I going to obey? Am I going to get up with this mud on my eyes? Am I going to walk this half mile to this pool? Am I going to wash off, not knowing what's going to happen, not having any proof that it's going to turn out right and a desired outcome? Am I going to do this, not knowing that he's going to be used as an example of God's power? He doesn't know any of that. This is a conversation between Jesus and his disciples. And so he's got to make a decision, am I going to do this? Well, of course, we see that he does make the decision. The power of God is demonstrated in him because he's healed, and we're talking about him today, 2,000 years later. But what happened if he didn't obey? What happened if he didn't trust? He wouldn't have got healed. You say, wow, too bad for Jesus. He wouldn't have been able to demonstrate his power. Not in that guy, but he had plenty of other people he was going to heal, and he was going to do a great. He didn't need this guy. He chose to use him. He chose to put him in an experience of trust so that he could demonstrate that he was for real. You say, what does that mean for me, Rand? That means the same for you and me. Many times God will put us in situations of trust so that he can demonstrate his power in and through us. Wow, can you think of an example of that just this week? I'm thinking of little Dorian. And how many of us were praying, dear God, literally tired going over this kid, and wow, who sinned? Eden or Bob and Jan? That would have happened to him. Neither. Why did it happen? I don't know all the ins and outs, but I know now in hindsight that the power of God was demonstrated in that little guy. Amen? So look, obedient faith or obedient trust, we got to have it even when we can't clearly see. Trust is hindered when my inability to clearly see God's plan keeps me from trusting. I can't see God's plan in this. I don't know if he's worth trusting, and so I'm not going to obey. Let me give you one more story some of you are very familiar with. Many of you heard about Pastor Andrew Brunson, who was a pastor in Turkey for over 20 years, 2 years ago, he was arrested, put in prison, didn't know why initially, wasn't told why he was arrested. Later on, he was told because of conspiracy to overthrow the government. This guy, in his own words, I watched several of his interviews this week, in his own words, said, man, we were really kind of nobodies. I have a little church that meets in a house in Turkey. I'm just a nobody kind of guy, and we were just telling people about Jesus, and we weren't hiding it. We were doing it out in the open, and then we get arrested. He's put in solitary confinement for months. After solitary confinement, he's taken and moved to another prison. He's stuck in a prison cell that was built for 8 prisoners, and there was 22 men living in this cell. 2 years plus he spends in this situation. You talk about a guy that couldn't see God's plan. You talk about a guy who struggled, and he talks about his struggle. Man, I struggled. In one interview, he talks about he wrote a song while he was in prison. And the whole point of the song was to help him focus on truths about God. That God is loving, He's faithful, He hasn't forgotten me. What was he doing? He was taking his knowledge of God and he was washing it over his mind while he was in this situation where there was no proof that the outcome was going to be good. It wasn't convenient. It didn't make sense. I'm just trying to serve God. I've spent my life, I've raised my kids as a missionary to a bunch of people that don't want to hear about Jesus, but I'm here. This doesn't make any sense. He didn't know God's plan. Well, you guys heard the story. He's eventually released from prison just about a week ago. In less than 24 hours, he's in the White House. And he asks the president, "Can I pray for you?" And the president says, "Yeah, sure." And Pastor Brunson gets down on his knees, lays his hand on the president, and prays that God would give him wisdom and lead him into righteousness. And this has nothing to do with politics or who our president. In fact, if you want to make an argument for it, if anybody needed prayer, our president does, amen? But just imagine, this guy goes from a prison cell in Turkey, in his own words, "I'm nobody. I'm just this guy that's pastoring this few people, trying to do what I need to do. They throw me in prison. I don't know what's going on. I'm holding on for 2 years." Boom! He finds himself in the White House in front of international television, praying over the President of the United States. And then from there, going from media outlet to media outlet, boldly proclaiming that I tell people about Jesus, I'm going to do that till the day I die. This is who I am. And I had to trust God through the whole situation. You talk about a powerful testimony of what we're talking about today. This guy had no clear vision of what God's plan was. He just had to hold on. He did. Now, the reality is, probably none of us are going to spend time in a Turkish prison. But many of us will be put in trust experiences where we can't clearly see what the plan of God is. I can guarantee you that. Trust obeys, even when it can't clearly see what God's plan is. See, because trust is active faith. And the active faith that we're talking about today works itself out in its most basic level in obedience. There's something else about this story. I pray that you've learned a few more things about trust as we've talked about this morning. But this story is also an illustration of God's plan of salvation. I want you to think about it for a minute. This guy was born physically blind. The Bible tells us that every person born is born spiritually blind. This guy, born physically blind, needed God's powerful intervention into his life in order to restore sight to him. The Bible tells us, in order for you and I to get spiritual sight, it takes a powerful intervention of God to provide that spiritual sight. When this guy decided that he would obey what Jesus had told him, he received his sight and was made whole. Romans talks about obedience of faith. When we believe the message that God says, if you want your spiritual sight restored, place your faith and trust in what I've provided through my Son Jesus, and we obey that and believe it, the Bible says we can have spiritual sight, everlasting life, wholeness of our person. Amen? Would you bow your heads, please, and close your eyes?